Hi everybody, and welcome to our detailed look through T.S. Eliot's poem Rhapsody on a Windy Night. This is one of Eliot's earlier poems, an avowedly experimental piece of work which he did quite early in his career. You will remember that Eliot, like other emerging modernist poets of the time, felt that the old poetic forms, the old literary ways of expressing things, describing the world, were no longer fit for purpose. And that was because the world had changed very much and they were living in a new era which demanded new ways of writing poetry and talking about it and looking at it. Now, as we see in a number of Eliot's other poems, the title is a massive piece of irony. It is neither a rhapsody nor a windy night. Rhapsody is a musical term. Eliot has a bit of a penchant for musical terms. It comes from an ancient Greek word, the rhapsode, which is a poem which is suitable for recitation all at one time. The idea behind rhapsody as it's transferred to music is that it's a free-form piece. It's usually enthusiastic. If you're rhapsodic about something, then you're raving about it. So it's a piece of enthusiasm which doesn't have any particularly firm form, any expectations around the way that it should work. So you can go wild and you can be emotional. And that's what we find in music. And it's also the idea of being untamed, ungoverned, unrestrained by strict formal conventions. And we see that very much in a lot of Eliot, well, all of Eliot's poetry. So here we go with a poem which in many ways is a typical poem in that it has many features of the form. It is by no means an ecstatic expression of feeling, and it does not focus on the kinds of issues that one would expect a rhapsody to be about. This is a poem which is about isolation, despair, decay. It has themes to do with memory, with the loss of memory, with the way in which the past leaves us. And what we find as readers is that we're set up for a poetic reverie, for something which is gorgeous and glorious. And what we get instead is something which is a much bleaker look at the moral nihilism which Eliot experiences in the modern world, and that instead of using the typical features of a romantic rhapsody, what he does is subvert these typical images. So we see, instead of beauty and love and light, we see darkness, stagnation, decline, decay. The other nuance in the title is that the term rhapsody suggests spontaneity and freedom. Excuse me. It's none of those things. There's nothing spontaneous. It's a very controlled and rigid poem. It's got two voices, and this ties up with an idea of there being a split psyche. One of the influences on Eliot was Freud, and that's a matter which has been discussed in class. The idea of the inner self, there being an inner self which is different from the outer self. Here what we see is a split, a kind of an oscillation between two voices in the poem. And one of the voices is just the disembodied voice of the omniscient narrator. The other is a street lamp. When you're writing about Rhapsody on a Windy Night, mention the lamps. I say that with my tongue in my cheek, but I've marked any number of student essays that fail to mention the most striking feature of this very striking poem. Okay. In the first stanza, we are told the time, 12 o'clock. Midnight is the witching hour. That's when spells are woven, lunar synthesis, whispering incantations. The moon, the goddess, is whispering spells. We've learned already that when a poem starts hissing at you, it usually means that there's something up in some way. And immediately we're introduced to the idea of memory being a powerful theme, because the lunar incantations, which are being whispered, dissolve the flaws of memory and all its clear relations in divisions and precisions. There's a great deal of repetition in this poem, and the internal rhyme there is very noticeable. So midnight is the beginning of the witch hour. It's normally associated with supernatural events. The poem explores the mood of this moment for 6 lines before a speaker appears walking down the street past some street lamps. The street, which we can see as a metaphor for the world, is held together in this lunar synthesis. Everything's been bathed in the silver light of the moon. The magic spells synthesize the speaker's perceptions and memory, and they stop it from being they turn it into an imprecise, irrational whole. In a simile, the speaker associates the lamps with drums beating, which means that they have a rhythm. They're either flickering or creating a sense of beating light and darkness as he passes through them. There's also an idea that the gas lamps at the time in the street really did make a beating noise. I haven't been able to substantiate that. And the other possible interpretation is that what's beating are the thoughts inside the narrator's head. We don't have a way of knowing. The adjective fatalistic refers to the idea that all events are predetermined and therefore inevitable. So we have a speaker who is under a magic spell, cast at this time of night, the moon, the rhythm of the lamps, and he's losing his rational mind, and with it his free will. In another simile, he relates what the night is doing to his memory, and this is a really crazy and disturbing image. It's shaking it in the way that a madman would shake a dead geranium. Geranium is normally a vibrant, bright flower that comes from a warm climate. A madman shaking a dead geranium in the middle of the night is a gesture of pointless futility that is extreme and very weird. So he's describing lunacy, a kind of temporary insanity, which is brought on by the changes of the moon, and this absurd image of a lunatic shaking a dead flower connects how the speaker's association in his mind is just a free-ranging internal monologue, a kind of stream of consciousness where one thing connects randomly to another. But in connecting his real life here on the street to a dead flower, he's suggesting that it had lost its life before it was reconfigured by his imagination. So the occasional random rhymes of incantations, relations, divisions, precisions, drum, geranium, and the kind of disordered magic of the first stanza are set up right at the beginning. Time continues in a linear fashion, so we do have a firm structure which is holding this in place. An hour and a half has passed, and it's now 1:30. Time has also slipped backwards from the present, and we're now in the past tense. Time becomes a memory related by the speaker in some unknown future. It's all mixed up and immutable and merged. In the story of this stanza, the speaker is still out in the street. His relationship with the world is intensified as his imagination moves beyond the as-ifs of similes to the realm of personification. The street lamp is alive, and indeed the only thing which really commands and controls this poem is the street lamp. The street lamp is the only one that has a voice, and it's an instructional voice telling the speaker what to do. It talks to him and it directs his gaze. Now, this is an imagistic technique. I don't want you to worry too much about it, but the idea is that the street lamp provides light which illuminates the darkness and allows the speaker to see a variety of vignettes, small scenes, which are plotless stories, the scene itself, much as if you flashed a light or a torch on something and you would see just that instant illuminated. you wouldn't know what happened before or after. The lamp is both a detached and an omniscient voice, and it narrates